first reading is from the second chapter of Genesis, beginning with the 15th verse found on page 2 in your pew Bibles. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it, you shall die." Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the other wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eye, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God.
Please remain seated for Psalm number 32. Happy are they whose transgressions are forgiven and whose sin is put away.
Happy are they to whom the Lord imputes no guilt, and in whose spirit there is no guile.
While I held my tongue, my bones withered away because of my groaning all day long.
For your hands were heavy on me day and night. My moisture was dried up as in the heat of summer.
When I acknowledged my sin to you and did not conceal my guilt, I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. Then you forgave me the guilt of my sin.
Therefore, all faithful may make their prayers to you in time of trouble. When the great waters overflow, they shall not reach them.
You are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with shouts of deliverance.
I will instruct you and teach you the way in which you should go. I will guide you with my eye.
Do not be like the horse or mule, which have no understanding, who must be filled with bit and bridle, or else they will not stay near you.
Great are the tribulations of the wicked, but mercy and grace to those who trust in the Lord.
Be glad, you righteous, and rejoice in the Lord. Shout for joy, all who are true of heart.
The second reading is from the 5th chapter of Romans, beginning with the 12th verse found on page 1027 in your pew Bibles. Just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all because all have sinned. Sin was indeed in the world before the law, but sin is not reckoned when there is no law. Yet death exercised dominion over Adam to Moses, even over the things whose sins were not like the transgressions of Adam, who was a type of the one who was yet to come. But the free gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died through the one man's trespass, much more surely have the grace of God and the free gift of the grace of one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for the many. And the free gift is not like the effect of the one man's sin, for the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation, but the free gift followed many trespasses, bringing justification. because of one man's trespass, death exercised dominion through that one, much more surely will those who receive the abundance of the grace and the free gift of righteousness exercise dominion in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God.
Please stand as you're able for the reading of the gospel.
The Holy Gospel for this, the first Sunday of Lent, is found in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." The devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, then throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." And Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world with their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you'll fall down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." And then the devil left him, and suddenly the angels came and waited on him. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. If you go to Israel today, they have a place called the Temptation Mount, or the Mountain of Temptations, where Jesus is taken and Satan engages Jesus with temptations. You're really hungry after 40 days of fasting. I can't even stay on a diet for 3 days. 40 days, you must have really been hungry. And Satan says, "Well, if you're the Son of God, you can do miracles. Just turn the stones into bread." And Jesus says no, and then he gives a reason. We don't live by bread alone. There's something more important than that. So the devil tries again. Takes Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple and says, "Jump off. If you're the Son of God, the angels will come and rescue you." And Jesus says, "No. You're not supposed to put God to the test that way." So finally then, Satan takes Jesus to a high mountain where they can survey all the kingdoms of the world with all their power and glory, and says, You can be an emperor just like Caesar. You can rule the world. Jesus doesn't give a reason. He says, away with you, Satan. Jesus has made up his mind. He's going to do God's work as the Messiah, and he's not going to get derailed by the temptations that Satan puts in front of him. I think Jesus had it kind of easy. Jesus doesn't stop to deliberate. He doesn't, maybe this is a good idea. Nope, no. Most of your and my situations in life are not clear-cut decisions between good and evil, between right and wrong. No, I think good and evil are kind of like strands of spaghetti. They're all intertwined. You take one bite, you get the whole mouthful. Even Jesus had it tough in Gethsemane. He had it easy with the devil on the mountain of temptation, but he had it tough with God in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember, he opens that prayer acknowledging that he's going to have to face prosecution and conviction and suffering and death. And he says, God, take this cup from me. I don't want to do this. And then he struggles through that prayer, and he finally finishes, not my will, but thy will be done. That was tough. I like the Jesus Christ Superstar version where Jesus finishes that prayer, let's hurry up and get it over with before I change my mind. So Jesus had it tougher with God than he did with Satan. Because with Satan, it's pretty clear. You got good here, you got evil there. And you and I are inclined to choose the good. I can only think of one time in my life when I had a clear choice between good and evil. It was, I'm guessing 1979 or so, something like that. It was the era in which the big controversy in America was the Unification Church. I don't know if you remember that. Came from Korea, had recruited tens of thousands of young people into its membership, and a recruiter asked me, Ted, would you like to convert and become a theologian for the Unification Church? And they were going to more than double the rinky-dink salary that the Lutherans were paying me. I'd get a free vacation to the Caribbean for my family. All I would have to do would be to support publicly Reverend Moon. Remember Reverend Moon? Okay. He did the great fireworks display in 1976 for the U.S. Bicentennial on the Mall in Washington. I'd think about it. Well, I got a telephone call one night from Martin Marty in Chicago, and if you don't know who he is, and you're in the Tuesday group, you'll find out because Martin Marty wrote a foreword to the book, Sin Boldly. So Marty says, Ted, I want you to stay away from the Unification Church. You know how they make their money? They make their money by manufacturing and selling munitions and weapons to terrorists around the world. And what they want you to do is advertise so that they can convert more Lutherans to their way of thinking. Don't do this, said Marty. I said, well, I'll think about it. So I prayed and thought about it and decided I won't do this. I made up my mind. I won't do this. A couple of weeks later, I met one of the Unification theologians at a reception, and he said, Ted, I hope you're still considering our offer. I understand, he says to me, that you would like to start an institute for future studies? And I said, yes, I do. I have this vision of this institute. We'll study population overgrowth and pollution. We'll study global warming, and we'll study climate change and all of these things because the planet really needs attention. I said I would really like to do that. And he says, well, how would $1 million be to just start your institute off and get it going? I had a grin on my face and I said, quote, "Get behind me, Satan." And he said, I take that as a no. I said yes, flatly no. So we shook hands and that ended the whole thing. It is rare in my life that there is such a clear division between what's good on one side and what's evil on the other. And so that was sort of, shall we say, easy to say no to Satan. It is tougher, more difficult for you and me when all the options look good. Then how do you decide? Let's go back to the Adam and Eve story, which you just heard a couple minutes ago. The serpent, in the translation you just heard, was described as what? Crafty. There are different translations, cunning, but the translation that I think is the best is the serpent was subtle. Not evil. The serpent was subtle. And so the serpent says to Eve, why don't you eat the fruit off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, God told me not to. Well, Eve, do you really trust God? Aren't you a little bit suspicious? Do you think God is really transparent? Well, yeah. Well, just think about it again, Eve. Maybe God is hiding something from you. God knows the difference between good and evil, and you don't. Aren't you a little suspicious of God there? Oh, gee, I hadn't thought about that, she says. Well, take a look. The serpent says, take a look again at that fruit. She looks at the fruit, and the fruit, my gosh, that's good-looking fruit. It looks so tasty. So Eve wants to taste the fruit because it's good. She's not got a choice between good and evil. She's got a choice between obeying God, which is good, and then tasting the fruit, which is good. You and I, normally, are going to choose the good. If the devil comes up to you and says, let's go out and do a little evil, it's easier to say no. But that's not the way we do things. We choose good things. The problem is that it's subtle. The good and the evil are intertwined like spaghetti strands. We have to make a decision this year, 2020. Whom are we going to elect for president? Well, over here, you've got somebody who says, let's have a border wall. We'll keep out murders and rapists and coronavirus. That's a good thing, right? Over here, we've got Medicare for all and tuition-free higher education. That's a good thing. Nobody, I've never heard a politician stand up and say, let's all do evil. Never heard that. We only have opportunities to do one good or another. This past week, I talked with a Lutheran pastor not far from here who has in his, I think it was a woman pastor, has in her congregation an elderly German woman. And they were talking about the elections, and she says to the elderly German woman, well, who are you going to vote for? And she says, I don't vote. Why not? Aren't you a citizen? Yes, I'm a citizen. Why don't you vote? She says, I don't trust myself. What do you mean you don't trust yourself? She says, I grew up in the 1930s in Germany. I was a member of the Hitler Jugend. The Hitler Jugend were teenagers who supported the Nazis. And she says, I really believe that Adolf Hitler was good. He was going to give us a third Reich, a 1,000-year reign in which the German language and culture would dominate the world. That was a beautiful thing to live for. And we all know how it ended, right? After the war was over, 50 million people had died violent deaths. That was the good that she had chosen. And she said, I don't trust myself to make judgments about what's really good. I think that's probably more like you're in my daily life than Jesus facing Satan on the Mount of Temptation. How should we live? Not trusting ourselves? I don't recommend that. No, I recommend that we do our best, make our judgments, careful judgments, and take action. My wife Karen's not with us today because she's in Minnesota with members of her family, and last night we had a number of telephone conversations, and let me tell you a story that came out of that. So there's Jill, sister-in-law, and Amy, her sister, had a mother who was very ill. So ill that Amy and Jill signed an NDR, and our DNR, all right, a director for non-resuscitation. And she was the mother was in the hospital and on life support system. And one night, Amy gets a phone call from the nurses. Your mother has gone into, and I don't know, but whatever it was life-threatening. What should we do? Said the nurses. And Amy says, well, spare nothing. I want my mother to live. And so all the gears went in. You can see the nurses are shaking their heads no. So everything was done then to bring the mother back. The mother comes back and is alive. But the result of that decision was that for a number of weeks then, the mother's period of suffering continues before she finally expires. So there's a little family tension, be that as it may. Amy, the daughter, is now feeling badly because her decision, I love my mother, I want my mother to be alive at all costs, that's choosing the good, resulted in prolonged suffering. Well, suppose Amy had made the other decision. Suppose she said to the nurses, we have signed the DNR, and if my mother dies tonight, then we'll accept that. Suppose she made that decision. And suppose her mother did expire that night. Then later on she might say, I killed my mother. And then she could feel guilty for that. It looks like when confronted with the decision to resuscitate or not resuscitate, she's got to make one or the other, and each of them puts her into a situation in which she feels a decision for the good resulted in something that wasn't good. What do? Well, I suggest that even though we don't make life and death decisions every day, this is probably more like what our responsibilities are. Now, the Lutherans have thought a lot about this over 500 years. The Lutherans don't know everything, but they do think. And here's what the Lutherans have come up with. Sin boldly. We don't have as an option purity. We don't have an option to say, "Begone, Satan." Oh, once in a while maybe, but not on a daily basis. No, it's those spaghetti strands of good and evil in which we take a mouthful and we get them both. But we have to negotiate this life. We have to make decisions and take actions, and we'll have to do the best with our finite judgment. Pure goodness finally comes from God and God alone, and God gives us that freely out of grace. And it's within that then that these tough decisions about good and evil are ones we can pursue with courage. We can sin boldly.